Hi students, and welcome to this lecture PowerPoint video on Oedipus Rex. We're moving into Unit 4 for the next 2 weeks, focusing on the life cycle, childhood, aging, and death. And many of the texts in the anthology consider perhaps the most quintessential literary theme, life and death. The Bildungsroman is woven into almost all of the text you're reading this week, and actually the last several weeks too. While it could be argued that any text dealing with humanity will deal with the cycle of life, the text over the next 2 weeks explicitly focus on childhood, death, or aging. Often, the death comes at the hands of an oppressor. In a few instances, death by suicide is interrogated. So for this week, you'll read Oedipus Rex, Sophocles, and next week, 2 texts, including Voltaire's Candide, or Optimism. So we have our quick read here for Oedipus Rex. We know that this is a play, sourced from Greece, written by Sophocles. Our key themes here: sight and blindness, fate, hubris, another word for excessive pride, class status, tyranny, democracy. In short, Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother, illustrating the Greek belief in fate. And our 2 anchoring key passages for Oedipus Rex are here at lines 445 to 46 that begins, "I am like this," and 1352 through 54 beginning, "I would not have come." So our structuring, anchoring quotations for thinking about Oedipus Rex. Sophocles grew up in the village of Colonus, a short distance north of Athens, and was likely from a wealthy family and received a good education. Athens was a major power in the Mediterranean world, a period known as the Golden or Classical Age, until the start of the Peloponnesian War in 431 BCE. Sophocles made technical changes to theater, including the use of scene painting and enlargement of the chorus, and brought in a third character, often called a triagonist, for more complex dialogues between characters. Aristotle outlines the content needed for a good tragedy. It imitates real, serious, and complicated action. It uses a stylized, elevated language, induces catharsis, or an outpouring of pity and fear on the part of the audience, and mixes metrical speech and song. The 6 elements of tragedy are divided into the form, called media, the manner of presentation, and the objects of imitation. So we have our 6 elements here: plot, character, language, thought, spectacle, and melody. These are elements of tragedy plays. You can begin to see the crossover with contemporary elements of fiction, the 6 elements of fiction: narrative structure, plot setting, theme, character, style, and point of view. Some overlap here with tragedies. Plots should be non-episodic. They should follow the structure of recognition. So a character recognizes the predicament that she's in. Catharsis, as I said, the character and the audience are inspired to feel fear, to feel pity. And in reversal, there's a change in plot line to achieve stasis at the play's end. Tragic plays should have unhappy endings. Characters should behave and experience what is probable and inevitable, and the gods should not be relied on to resolve events that are central to the play's action. Although they are sometimes called upon to, say, resolve elements of preceding actions or subsequent actions, their involvement here is not as overbearing as some of the other epic poems that we've read this semester, because tragedies, as I said, are intended to imitate real and serious actions that make sense. And so because of that, the influence of the gods, its divine intervention is sort of thought of as unreasonable, unlikely. Chorus is not an arbitrary character in the tragedy, but in emulation of earlier times when the chorus played a role in religious rites from which tragedy evolved, the chorus actually plays a more integral role in the performance. And you might want to scroll back to the theater scene in the previous PowerPoint slide if you want to envision the relationship of the chorus to the audience and the stage. Plot is the sequence of events, and according to Aristotle, the most essential aspect of a tragedy, because a tragedy is a representation of human action. Humans create their tragedies. There are a series of plot points that lead to tragedy that can be attributed back to our own hands. And so in his Poetics, Aristotle lists all of the elements of theater in the following order. Here again, the elements beginning most importantly with plot, moving to character, thought, diction, music, and spectacle. So Aristotle claims that the best plots feature recognition and reversal. So reversal of fortune and recognition. And Aristotle claims that the plot works best when these occur close together or even simultaneously. One example of recognition and reversal happens in this play when the messenger arrives to tell Oedipus that Polybus of Corinth is dead and that Oedipus will be the new king. So we have good tidings that quickly end when it's revealed that Polybus is not Oedipus's true father and that a herdsman gave the child to the messenger many years ago. So we have this rapid and quick juxtaposition of recognitions and reversals that contribute to the ebb and flow of plot, which results in a dramatic intensity, right? It builds our interest, it builds suspense from the beginning to the end. The Sphinx here, we have our riddle that structures the beginning of this play. And the riddle is as follows: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? Of course, Oedipus crawled as a baby, further hampered by those pierced and pinioned ankles. He walked proudly as a grown man, the king of Thebes, the most powerful of men, the man we see in the action of this play. But after the revelations and reversals of his true identity, he blinds himself and exits the stage in an eternal darkness, hobbling along on 3 legs with only a stick to guide him. So ironically, while Oedipus knows the answer to the Sphinx's riddle, of course, humans, right? He doesn't know the answer to the more fundamental question of his own identity. He has no idea of his true parentage. Of course, in the action of the play, he discovers that he is both son and husband to Jocasta, both father and brother to his 2 children. And so, while Oedipus can answer the riddle, mankind, humans, he doesn't know a much more fundamental question with regard to his own identity, who he is. He doesn't know his parentage, and, through the action of the play, he makes these discoveries. According to Sophocles, Laos, the king of Thebes, learned from the Delphic oracle that his son would kill him. So he orders a shepherd to have his son by Jocasta exposed on Mount Cytherion. Exposure was a fairly common practice in the ancient world. It involved leaving the baby in a wild place, presumably to die. It allowed parents to dispose of unwanted children without incurring any blood guilt by killing the child themselves. A shepherd, however, discovers this infant, takes him to Corinth, where he is raised by King Polybus and Queen Merope. And of course, the action here scapegoats Oedipus for the crime of being born. The mere fact that he has been born scapegoats him. And the challenge and fortune that Oedipus experiences in the course of this drama, from the best to the worst, begs the question, if it could happen to him, could it happen to anyone? And so the play reminds its audience that humans ultimately cannot control their destiny, that fate is decreed by the gods, it cannot be altered, and that the meaning of life cannot be known until life is past. And so we have this Oedipus case, where his real story, the real meaning of life, is not apparent until almost the end of this tragedy. And revelations ongoingly, sort of in terms of plot, change the arc and the meaning of his life. Tiresias appears in other Greek works, including the Odyssey. So this will be a throwback for you. Of course, Odysseus travels to Hades to visit Tiresias immediately after being released by Circe in the Odyssey. And one myth explains Tiresias's physical blindness as a punishment incurred by the goddess Hera. So Tiresias had been judged unfavorably, according to Hera, in a debate as to, well, a kind of racy debate. And Hera didn't like his response. And so she blinds him. And at the same time, Zeus sort of empowers Tiresias with the gift of foresight, and that's intended to somehow compensate for the loss of his eyesight. And so we encounter Tiresias here again in Oedipus Rex, because we have Oedipus symbolizing the dramatization of visionary paradox in this play, right? The old prophet is blind, but can see the truth. Oedipus has sight, but doesn't know who he is or where he comes. He has no clear relationship to his truths. And so, having answered the riddle of the Sphinx, Oedipus doesn't hesitate to solve the present problem of the play in finding Lausus' murderer and the cause of the pestilence. Of course, his confidence leads him astray from reason, and when Tiresias, the seer, formulates the riddles about Oedipus and the identity of the murderer, Oedipus does not even consider dropping his investigation and inquiry. And so you may notice that in this Oedipus cycle, Oedipus gains the powers of prophecy after physically blinding himself. And so it begs this question: how are sensory vision and fortune-telling related, or at odds with each other in this Greek tragedy? Oedipus is a tyrannical figure from the mythic past, conceived by Sophocles in an age of democracy. So a very different leader than Oedipus. We have Creon, more reserved, deliberate, smooth in his speech. His character is consistent with subsequent plays such as Antigone and Oedipus at Colonus. Creon's reliance upon law and order leads to a tragedy in Antigone, while his decency and his fairness provide Oedipus with a final haven in Oedipus at Colonus. And while we have these sort of foil characters, Oedipus displaying, many qualities of an arrogant despot, Creon seems specifically characterized as a more democratic leader. And so we can juxtapose these characters and understand that Oedipus's greatest flaw is also his greatest strength. He exhibits this excessive pride, this hubris, this self-confidence, by reasoning that he alone can save the city of Thebes. Ironically, he's probably right, and while Oedipus is the cause of the present plague on Thebes, he is also the cure. So we have these multiple paradoxes in Oedipus as a character, and we can think about how politics is embodied symbolically through the juxtaposition of these two characters of Creon and Oedipus. If Oedipus were to listen to his family, listen to his friends, his advisors, he would save himself, perhaps, but then the consequence of that in terms of plot would doom Thebes to destruction. So we have this paradox, the cause and the cure. The cause of the plague is the solution. He saves the city the first time by solving the riddle of the Sphinx. He's a hero. He becomes king. But when he saves the city a second time by discovering the murderer of Laus, the former king, he becomes this outcast, banished from his home, defiled among men, a scapegoat for the community, and all of its social ills. And so the early success and victory sort of unwillingly sets him up for a dramatic fall in the sort of culmination of his tragic destiny. And that cruel destiny had been ordained from the very beginning, right? I'm thinking about the point that, Oedipus is a scapegoat figure just by virtue of his birth. He stands savior, sinner, both blameless and guilty, heroic and defiled, greatest and worst amongst men. And he is all these things, not just over time, sort of sequentially, but immediately and simultaneously. And therefore, I think, pitiably, the most human of all characters. So the lesson here for Oedipus Rex is one that we can turn to the closing lines to discover. In Greek tragedy, the closing lines of a play, usually issued by the chorus, who iterate the gods' decrees and guide the audience in sort of how to perceive the play's content. The closing lines reveal the play's moral lesson or meaning or takeaway, right? And in this play, the chorus clearly states that no human can be exempt from suffering in this world, that peace is achieved and the gods' folly for twisting man's fate is removed only after our death, right? And so as you are considering this play, I want you to think about how this theme of tragedy and humanity is pervasive and consistent throughout the play, and what that suggests, right, for understanding Oedipus Rex, for understanding the human condition. You have 2 discussion questions this week. The first here, Oedipus's pride might be considered a tragic flaw, but is it the pride that truly brings about his downfall? Is it fate, perhaps? Looked at another way, could the pestilence affecting Thebes be rooted out without Oedipus's single-minded determination to solve the latest riddle, regardless of the consequences? Do you believe he feels remorse, perhaps, for everything that has transpired? Or is he blameless, not having realized that he was killing a king and his own father? Blindness, right? Symbolic blindness, actual blindness in this play. And discussion question 2, Oedipus blames Apollo for bringing his sorrow to completion, but claims that the act of putting his eyes out was his own. Certainly, there is a sense that Oedipus does not deserve his fate, but then is he responsible for what? And what does the audience learn from the experience of this play?